All right, guys, just a bit of a quick discussion and revision and onto new stuff. We discussed a case yesterday where a married woman injured somebody else. Well, we discussed that in general, but yesterday was a discussion of what happens if she injures her husband. So it was taught in a brisa that she doesn't forfeit. Guys, there's a lot of background noise, and I don't know where it's coming from. Yeah, it's probably there. I think so. No, it's still there. Is it Gavin?
I've got a fan on.
Yeah, it's you. All right. So what happens is yesterday we discussed a case in which a married woman injured her husband, and it was taught in a brisa that she does not forfeit her ketubah, meaning she's not made to surrender her ketubah to her husband in order to reimburse him for the injury. So you want to know why is that so? Because the suggestion from the Gemara is let her sell or assign her ketubah at the discounted amount to her husband for that injury. Or if she forgives the ketubah to the husband, there's no loss to anybody. Meaning that we just concluded that a woman isn't required to sell her ketubah to pay for an injury she inflicted upon another person, because that's a different case, because there we're going to assume that she will forgive the ketubah to her husband and cause the buyer a loss, so as not to create marital strife. Okay, remember we concluded further that she's also not required to assign a ketubah to the victim himself, because there's no, even if it's no cause of loss, because the worst is she's not paying him anyway. We're saying it's wasting the court's time. She's not going to want to create anonymity between her and her husband. This is a different case. Firstly, she's the person she injured is her husband, and if anything, it might create a little bit of marital bliss, because firstly, there are two factors. The assignment poses no risk to anybody. It's not as if a buyer is buying the ketubah at a discounted rate. She's selling it to her husband for a discounted rate. And number B, it's purposeful because the husband won't have to pay that ketubah in the event it becomes due, because the payee of the ketubah would then be the husband himself. So the brisa is saying, well, why is that the case? And the Gemara says, obviously the brisa is according to Rabbi Meir, who says that it's forbidden for a man to keep his wife even 1 hour without a ketubah. She can't waive that right to pay for her injury, because, as Gavin quite rightly said yesterday, she's giving up the rights to the ketubah to her husband, which means she loses her leverage. And there's no financial deterrent for him against divorcing her. So that is different in a case where the ketubah is sold to another person, because either way, if she sells it at a discounted rate to a buyer for prospecting, and he pays like 10 or 20% in order that he collects her full ketubah on the husband's death or divorce, guess what? If the husband divorces her, he now owes that ketubah amount to the purchaser. So there's no deterrent here. He wouldn't owe it to her because there's no third party involved. So we say, listen, there can't be any sort of issue with Rabbi Meir here, because the deterrent factor isn't there anymore. So he can divorce her if he wants, okay, and collect the ketubah for the injury. So if we're concerned about that, then you can say, well, look, maybe you can't extract the money from him, but it doesn't actually matter. Because at the end of the day, once she becomes liable to him for having injured him, the ketubah no longer serves as a deterrent, because if he divorces her and he becomes liable now to pay the ketubah money, he can just simply say to the court, I'm not giving it to you. I'm withholding that payment of the ketubah, and I'm minusing the injury fee. So it's not possible to say that the woman is not required to assign him her ketubah, according to Rabbi Meir's rule. Because what we learned in Bava Kamma, maybe Arthur can answer this. What do we learn with a tum ox? Why do you take the tum damage from the body of the animal?
That's a good question. Why do you take the tum damage from the body of the animal? No, I can't remember why. Okay. I thought there was a muat from the body of the animal.
Okay, so no, muat is
Really?
cash or from choice property.
Oh, okay.
So what we learned is, bottom line, there's no penalties in Babylonia. There's no penalties in Babylonia, and a kanas and a tam is seen as either compensation or a penalty, depending on whom you're dealing with. So in Babylonia, you might not be able to get payment on penalties, but you can kidnap assets because possession is 9/10 of the law. That's the bottom line. So whereas compensation means it's full payment, which means they do deal with those cases in Babylonia. Therefore, you can have legal cases not for penalties, but for compensation. And therefore, you can say it's from choice property or cash equivalent, because they do try that in Babylonia, but not half payment damages, which could be seen as a penalty. It could be seen as compensation, or it could be seen as a penalty. We learned that. So the best thing is, if you take the body of the tam ox, you've got possession of the asset. The court can't extract it back. You have it. They won't award you penalties if you don't have anything in your hands. But if you got it, they've got to try and take it away from you now, and you can deduct it as a cost. So we're saying the same thing here with the ketubah, is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if she grants it or not. If the husband divorces her, he's saying, listen, I'm just deducting penalties here. So that's not a deterrent for divorce. So Rabbi Meir's ruling wouldn't apply in this case. So the Gemara is referring to a case where the ketubah is great. And for the small amount of injury compensation, you wouldn't want to lose that small amount. So in other words, there's still a deterrent at the moment. Because if she's a virgin and it's 200 zuz for the basic amount, let's not even talk about supplementary amounts. For the ikka ketubah, never mind the supplementary, and she doesn't have property, and his damage is 30 zuz, believe me, he's still not going to want to divorce her. He might want to because she's not that fond of the fact that she injured him, but it's going to cost him too much. So that deterrent still exists of Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara says, as you remember, guys, yesterday, well, what if a ketubah is greater than the biblical ketubah? We should establish her at the biblical amount of the ketubah and let him sell the rest for his injury. Meaning that, okay, so say she's a non-virgin, and it's his second marriage, and he owes her 100 zuz. He might have promised her, in addition to that, other things as well, because they were in the romance stage of the relationship. This is apart from the property she brings in. So it's saying, listen, if there's extra, she can keep her base ketubah because we wouldn't want to leave her impoverished, but she must sell the rest of it to him in lieu of his injury. So he doesn't have to pay that upon divorce or death. Okay? So that was the suggestion of the Gemara. And the Gemara says, look, the Brisa doesn't refer to that. It refers to a case where a ketubah is not greater than the biblical ketubah, meaning that maybe she's owed only 100 zuz for being a non-virgin. And the amount of the injury, if it's less, it's still a deterrent. But what if it's more? So how do you explain such a Brisa? So it's saying just as she cannot sell the ketubah while she's married to him, so she does not forfeit her ketubah while she's married to him. In other words, the same thing that protects her in both cases occurs. It's not a double rule book. So at present, the Gemara understands that to mean that just as a married woman is unable to sell her ketubah, we're talking about a proper sale, guys. We're not talking about a buyer that's paying her 10% and prospecting on the fact that she gets widowed or gets divorced beforehand. But she can't do a complete sale because the husband has to get the usufruct if it's malog property, and even not, it's his decision because he's got the Bazon property under his title deed, and then should they get divorced, he has to pay that equivalent to what was valued at the ketubah. So she can't be forced to give up any part of a ketubah, even on speculation. That's what it's saying. So, just seeing where that background noise comes from. I'm just going to put Arthur on mute. Okay. So, guys, what happens then is that the Gemara says, look, at the end of the day, we're going to have to analyze it in a slightly different way. So what we're basically saying is that it can't be referring to the literal amount. What it's saying is, what do we mean by the sort of protection that she has? She doesn't have it. She injured her husband. In other words, the deterrent is only to protect her in the event that she doesn't hurt the husband. But if she hurts him, he's not obligated to stay married to her. So that deterrent loss is her own fault. But it's also saying that the court will never do anything to reduce the deterrent, even if she's at fault, because at the end of the day, they won't force her to assign her basic ketubah to her husband, because then the marriage is for sure over. Okay? So as far as that's concerned, it's saying, well, then what do you actually mean? So it's basically saying, look, we're talking about a slightly different case. According to Rava, he's saying in the latter case of the brisa, we've come to a case of the ketubah of the male children. Why? Because you're seeing a distinct difference. The first part of the ketubah, we're saying that, look, if there's any supplementary amount, she should be forced to sell that or assign that money to the husband so he doesn't have to pay it in the event of a divorce, whereas his estate doesn't have to pay it on his death. Then the second part of the brisa is saying she doesn't have to pay anything at all. So there can't be a contradiction. So it's saying, look, if there's a supplementary amount, although she doesn't have to sign over her ikar ketubah, her primary ketubah, there's certainly she has to make restitution. So we're saying, well, how can there be a double rule book? And Rav is saying it's not. In the latter case of the brisa, we've come to a case of a ketubah of the male children. And what is the brisa teaching? Just as a woman who sells her ketubah to others doesn't lose her ketubah of the male children. And what is the reason? Because it was money, in other words, financial concerns that forced her to make the sale. So to a woman who sells her ketubah to her husband, doesn't lose the ketubah of the male children. What's the reason? Because we assume it was money. In other words, God's financial duress that forced her to make the sale. So the brisa is not stating that a woman wouldn't have to forgive part of her ketubah if she injured her husband. It's just saying that the children are protected. So I'm going to just explain it and show you how our states are divided up before we get into a new stage. In Ketubah 53a, if a woman sells her ketubah for the discounted amount to another person and she dies first, allowing her husband to inherit the ketubah and the buyer to suffer loss, her sons can still collect her ketubah when the father dies. It's different to the case of Rabbi Ba'aba, where she died and she gifted it to her son and the husband was still alive, the second husband. Then we're saying that he's got an extraordinary claim because of the enactment of Usha, but here the second husband in fact did die, so that the buyer can't take it in that case. What would happen is whatever she gifted to her children goes to her children. So it might have been thought that the sons from another mother could claim that by her setting a ketubah, the mother willfully would forfeit all the rights to the ketubah. Okay? So we're saying it's the same thing if she were alive now, the buyer would take the ketubah and not her. So the Gemara says there still has to be a certain amount of protection for children, and that they say that the mother had to sell her ketubah because of financial duress. So although she gave up her right to collect the ketubah in the event of her widowhood or divorce, she didn't intend to forfeit the rights of the ketubah through the sale, Rashi's saying. So what we're saying is that basically if she died first, the buyer couldn't collect if she has a male heirs. Do you understand that? I want you to explain it to me before I show you how the division works. Arthur, explain it. And then Gavin and Kevin. Can't hear you.
The last bit went off. I don't know what happened there. I lost like 10-15 seconds on the WhatsApp. I saw your mouth moving, but I couldn't hear anything.
Okay. Did I go off, Gav? Kevin?
What if you're saying that if she dies first, then the ketubah, the value of the ketubah can't be collected or cashed in by the heirs.
No,
his
that's not
sons.
what I'm saying. All right, guys, I'm going to give you a step-by-step process. The wife here is desperate. She needs cash flow. Okay. So the enactment of Usha will not allow her to make an outright sale for the ketubah to the purchaser because the husband loses a certain amount of control. And then what initially was thought is that maybe she could have a conditional sale where he would still get the produce and the user fract, but at the end of the day, she can sell the title deed for the full amount because it's her property, the Malog property. In other words, it's the same thing as a father leaving a property to a son while the father's alive. He's wanting the produce from the field or the user fract for rental, but the title deed goes to the son. So we're saying, like, without the enactment of Usha, she could sell the property for the full amount, but have a conditional sale to make sure the Malog property still gives the husband an income of the produce or the user fract. So then why do you need the enactment of Usha? Because the thing of it is, it's to protect the husband, because if the Son Bazel property was gifted over to him, he owns the title deed. So she couldn't do it anyway, but the Malok property is hers. So we don't want to create animosity between a husband and wife by him saying, listen, you're rather sickly, you sold it off, and now at the end of the day, I can't get the property because you sold the title deed. I might be able to get the produce, but I was entitled to that property. You told me it would be mine. So, in other words, the enactment of Usha by Rabbi Meir is just ensuring marital bliss so that things aren't sold under his nose, even if he would still benefit from the produce without the enactment of Usha. So what it's saying is here is that there's still a part of the conditional sale which protects her children. So the arrangement is as follows. He pays like 10%. And why does he pay 10%? Because he's got only a probable chance of collecting it. Either if the husband and wife get divorced or he predeceases her, then the buyer can collect, because it's now not creating any issue with the husband and wife. Again, why? Because if they get in divorce, there's always issues now with the husband and wife. So that's not preventing it, except instead of paying his ex-wife the ketubah, he pays the purchaser who bought that right from her. In the event that he predeceases her, it's not affecting his lifestyle. So therefore, the purchaser still comes out winning. But we're saying, what happens in the case of she predeceasing the husband? In that case, what happens? So we're saying in that case, her heirs are protected. Because if she predeceases the husband and the husband dies, what would happen if the purchaser has a title deed? He could then collect it from the husband's estate. So we're saying, no, if she predeceases the husband, her children are protected. The purchaser cannot take that property away, because if she's got male children, they're entitled to inherit it. So it's a conditional sale, and it only works if she doesn't die before the husband.
So I don't understand. Can I ask you something, Damon?
Of course.
What I don't understand here is if the husband doesn't die, right? If she dies before him, right? The wife dies, then the husband gets the usufruct. Then the purchaser gets the property. The kids are not protected in that case. So it seems like if the one dies, if the wife dies, precedes the husband, the children are protected. But if it's the other way around, they're not. That's what I'm worried about. Doesn't make sense.
No, that's exactly the case. If the husband dies, okay, and predeceases his wife, the children are not protected. That's correct. She sold it. She got the benefit for a discounted rate. That's absolutely correct. She sold.
So when are the when are the children protected? When? Just give us that example.
If she dies first.
So if he dies first, the children are not protected. It's too bad because you sold the property. But so this guy who's purchasing is taking a hell of a risk, because it's only if the husband dies first does he get the property. Otherwise, he doesn't.
Or if they get divorced.
Or if they get divorced, but not if something happens to her.
Correct.
Okay. No, just asking. Okay, it's just interesting. Okay. Thank you.
But it's not such a risk because I mean most people want to die before their wife. So
Okay, so that's
But Damon,
what.
just going back a few steps, why would somebody want to speculate and pay the 10%? What would the purpose be? Why would they have done that? I can't understand. What was the whole purpose of the speculatory payment? What for what?
Okay, so Kevin, I say to you that there is a draw, a draw, and you need 100 grand, but you've got 10 grand. You've got a 1 in 10 chance of winning. 10 friends get together. Okay, each puts in 10 grand. Okay, now you would like 100 grand, but that 10 grand is not a big deal to you because you got money. So to have a 1 in 10 shot of coming in, you might say, well, that's quite low. So you might say, well, what happens if we've only got 5 friends and each one's putting in 20,000 rand, but you've got a 1 in 5 chance of it coming through for you? Then it might be worth to do 20 grand and have 1 in 5 instead of 10 grand and 1 in 10. So as the odds change, so you're paying a higher amount. The more probable, the higher amount you pay. The discounted rate is for probability. So in what case would the person want to do it, the purchaser? Number one, the purchaser would want to do it if the husband, say the purchaser's a doctor, okay? And they know she needs money for medical bills for the family. The doctor might say he's got a brother and he's prepared to do it because the husband's going to predecease her and she needs to pay for medical bills in the meantime because she can give his life to last an extra year, but at the end of the day, to make him comfortable. But at the end of the day, she's as healthy and fit as a fiddle, and he's 20 years older, and he's already have got ailing problems. So they need to pay medical bills in order to sustain him further. So it's going to give him another year or two comfortable. And then the doctor might have a brother that says, listen, the odds here are good. And she might say, I don't accept 10% under those circumstances. I'd rather hold out and get, so you might say, let me give you 20%, 25. It's an arrangement both parties come to, according to probability and speculation. Okay? According to circumstances. So you can, it's not set at 10%. And in fact, maybe it's more when the probability is higher. So what does this protection mean, that she's protected herself against her husband? Well, firstly, if she's been married twice and she abused the second husband and injured him, he's not going to think too kindly of his second wife, and and also he might want to divorce her because he pays. She has to sell her ketubah to him at a discounted amount in the event that he divorces her or predeceases her. So he might say, "Listen, I'm not divorcing you, but I'm quite happy if your kids don't get the money because I'm not that fond of you at the moment, and your kids from your first marriage, I'm not so fond of either. I'd rather my kids have it from my marriage with you, not the first set of kids." Do you get what I'm saying? After he's been injured, he might say, well, I'm not mad about your kids from a previous marriage. So I tell you how it works, okay? Is that if you look at the 52nd daf of ketubah, not the 53rd, the stipulation of the ketubah of the male children, which is called benin dichrin, Ketubah's benin dichrin, dictates that if a wife predeceases a husband, she predeceases him. Her surviving children are entitled to collect. Just hang on a second. Okay, all right. So her surviving children are entitled to collect her ketubah. So let's see how this works. There's a statutory section plus any additional amount and son bazal property. Remember, the maluk property isn't counted because it's not written in the actual contractual ketubah. She could have got that from her parents afterwards, or could have been in a formal arrangement. But in the ketubah, there's a statutory section and an additional amount, and it's son bazal. So her children inherit that upon the husband's death by his estate. Before house, there's a lot of background noise. Where's it coming from?
No, my fan's off now.
I'm on mute.
All right, so I'm going to put everybody on mute. Sorry, guys. All right, so again, she's been married twice. So there's each time she was married, let's not say she was married twice. Let's say the husband was married twice. Let's not say her husband was married twice. Okay. So what happens here is upon the husband's death, he's got kids from his first marriage and he's got kids from his second marriage. Okay. Now, there's one of two cases. One where the wife has a larger ketubah than the other. So his first wife, he obviously owes her more. Why? Because she was probably a virgin. So that's already 200 zuz instead of 100 zuz. Let's say she came from a wealthier family and the Tzun Bazel amount was higher. Why? Because the husband, they wanted a good shidduch for their daughter. So the father then contributed as far as that's concerned. Now, if both wives die in the husband's lifetime, he basically inherits both ketubas. In other words, what each of them promised the husband. And the stipulation requires that the respective ketubas remain intact for the wife's male children. So when the husband later dies, his heirs first take the ketubah of their respective mothers and only then divide the rest of the estate equally. Okay? So the children of the mother with the larger ketubah receives a larger share of the father's estate than the children of the mother with the smaller ketubah. So let's just say the first wife's ketubah was 1,000 zuz, right? Because he promised her 200 zuz, she was a virgin, and there was 800 zuz because the father-in-law, she was in her 20s, wanted a yeshiva bocha for a husband for his daughter, and that's 1,000 zuz. Great. So the estate would have to give her children 1,000 zuz. Then the second wife is not a virgin. Let's just say, Kev, you're falling asleep. It's not. So she only gets 100 zuz, and maybe there's 100 zuz extra supplementary that he promised her, whatever the case may be. So the children then get the 200 zuz. Okay? Because the children can't say from the second marriage, listen, the first wife passed off already, and the children from the first wife, they're not entitled to anything. No. Each of the children of the previous wives, the male children, are entitled to their share. So what happened also then is the husband is only his own wife of 800 zuz. So again, first wife's ketubah was 1,000 zuz. Second wife's ketubah was 200 zuz. Both the wives died before him, and then he died last, and then he's got a 2,000 zuz estate. So he owes the first wife 1,000 zuz, so that goes to her male children. Then the second wife, he owes 200 zuz, that goes to the second wife's male children. Then in terms of his assets, he's got an extra 800 zuz because he's worth 2,000 zuz. So that then is his, and that's equally divided amongst the two wives' children of 400 zuz each. So in other words, they get 1,400 zuz. It's 1,000 plus the 400 from his. And the second wife's children that had 200 zuz gets the 200 zuz plus his 400 from his 800, which is 600 zuz. So the size of the ketubas are the same, but the one wife died before the husband and the other died afterwards. So in that case, the sons of the wife who died second can't say that they alone are entitled to collect their mother's ketubah, because she was widowed and therefore was owed the ketubah, where the sons of the wife who died first can't take their mother's ketubah since it was never owed to her. So in other words, what Rashi is saying is the sons of the wife who died first also take their mother's ketubah. So they can't take the ketubah apparently yet until the husband dies. Do you get what I'm saying? Because that property belongs to the husband. Does that make sense, guys, or not?
It does. Can I just ask you? Just want to add something. The what's that last property where they added themselves? What's it called? What's it called? The property that she brings in later.
Malog.
Malok. The Malok property, that's unrelated. When she dies, goes straight to the children, correct? Or does it go to him?
Okay, so the Malog property, that was the discussion initially. While
We
he's
had it
alive,
before, eh?
while he's alive, it goes to him. But when he dies,
Yeah.
that then is going to it's her property. So her children would get it. Her male children would get it.
So while he's alive, okay, so they don't get any inheritance until he passes away, either from the ketubah or even stuff that's not in the ketubah, like for instance the Maloko property.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, we did cover it. I forgot. Sorry, it's my fault.
So the thing of it is that often we're talking about here two cases. The first one is it was his second marriage and they were her children from a previous marriage. Generally, the second husband isn't that fond of her kids enough to financially go at a loss. But if it's his children and he had two marriages, but they're all his children, he might be more generous when she dies. If he doesn't need the money, he might offer them some sort of recompense in his lifetime. He's entitled to do that because he's going to feel more affection towards his children. So, Gavin, to summarize, if her ketubah contains a supplement to the statutory amount, which is called Tosefet ketubah, okay, Tosefet ketubah. So you've got the Ikka ketubah, which is the statutory amount, and you've got the Tosefet ketubah, which is the supplementary amount. We require her to waive that supplementary amount to her husband at its discounted value to satisfy the debt. Why? Because according to Rashi, she injured him. So she still has a statutory amount as a deterrent for divorce. So how this came about was, according to Rashi, she injured him. If she's got a supplementary amount, she has to sell that to satisfy the debt of injury. But she's not forced to sell her statutory amount. If her ketubah doesn't contain a supplementary amount, then the law depends on the amount of damage, Gavin. If the amount of damage equals or exceeds the amount of the ketubah, she must waive her ketubah to the husband at the discounted amount, because even if she doesn't do that, there's no deterrent for a divorce, because he can just give a divorce and remove what he owes her for damages. If the damage is less than the amount of the ketubah, she keeps her ketubah and pays nothing until the marriage ends, if the damage is less. So does that make sense? So the foregoing holds true that she obviously, provided she owns no malog or tzon basal property. If she does own malog property or tzon basal, she must sell that property at its discounted value to her husband or another buyer to pay off her liability. All questions cleared, guys? Kev?
I won't be able to give it over like you did. I've got a bit of a better understanding of it.
All right, so the bottom line
There's
is
so many facts and like.
okay, bottom line, she has to, she doesn't have to sell her statutory ketubah of 100 zuz or 200 zuz if she's a virgin and not, but anything other than that, she's got to make good on the debt. She's got to make
the
good on
husband,
the debt.
if the husband had right to the usufruct, and it was sold, the property was sold, he still has a right to claim the usufruct if it changed hands. If it went on.
Hang on a sec. Two things. The first one is injury. So if a wife injures her husband, he's saying that there's still a deterrent for divorce if the injury is far less than the ketubah, because it's going to cost him a lot of money to pay her out in order to claim back a small amount of injury. At the end of the day, he can still grant her a divorce and then pay that amount, but take off the amount for the injury. But if he's going to pay a lot of money, he's not going to want to divorce her. So the problem is if the injury is far higher then the ketubah money owing, there's no deterrent, but that's her fault. So Rabbi Meir's case wouldn't protect her then, because at the end of the day, if she injured another person and she sold it at a discounted rate to a buyer, the husband couldn't divorce her because he'd still have to pay the buyer, if not his wife. But besides from that, she would forgive her husband the debt. So we're saying that it's no good if she injures another party. She's not made to sell a ketubah. But in both cases, she has to sell any supplementary income, etc., as long as it doesn't provide detriment to her husband. But in the case of the husband, she has to pay for his injuries. If she has malugad by sale property, she has to sell it at a discounted rate.
But if they're in a good marriage, she does, and she causes damage to him, and it's unintentional. Maybe he'll forsake the damages. Maybe he doesn't. He may not want to claim those damages from you, unless the marriage is as you're going down the tubes. Then
no. He could turn around and say, "Listen, if it was an accident, that's fine. But if there was any sort of negligence, let's just say not even intent, there was negligence and it cost him 50 grand, he could say to her, with all due respect, you're a dozy driver, not your fault, it's not your strength, but you cost me 50 grand because of the way you did it. You expected me to pay you another 50 grand in terms of what I promised you extra, and can't you at least, you've got no money, but why must I pay it? Just deduct it of the amount I owe you, so that in the event that you get the money, you deduct that off the
contract.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Guys, I wish you a wonderful Shabbos.
Scaf, that Damon.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm going. I'm probably going to this dating thing on Motzei Shabbos. So if I do go,
do you want to do
when
this
can I?
on Sunday rather?
Sunday morning. If that's. But if I don't go, then should I phone you guys first thing Motzei Shabbos? Let's
let's start there. Let's start with a phone call Motzei Shabbos, and if you can't do it, then we'll do it on Sunday. I'm fine with Sunday.
All right.
Sunday morning, if that's it. Arthur, are you okay?
No, I work Sunday morning.